Good evening. I'm sorry that we're starting a bit late, but there seems to have been a lot of traffic in New York, and I guess heat has bothered some. So I'd like to welcome all of you to what I think is going to be an absolutely fascinating program. And I would especially like to thank the committee chairs that are sponsoring the program, Stephen Schindler of the Art Law Committee, Robert Michaels of the MENA, or Middle East North African Committee, Michael Cooper, and Anil of the UN Committee, and Anil of the International Human Rights Committee. It's very exciting that these committees with diverse interests have come together to sponsor this program. I'm Barbara Hoffman. I'm a member of the Art Law Committee and chair of its subcommittee on cultural heritage. I would also like to thank and welcome all the people from the United Nations who have joined us to participate in the program, and I especially want to thank the panelists who are going to participate. Each of them is performing a major labor in this field of cultural heritage protection. I'd also like to thank Tim Slade, who I'm going to introduce you briefly, who is an amazing documentary filmmaker and who was basically the impetus for this program entitled The Destruction of Memory. A little bit of housekeeping. We have such a short amount of time that I've given you handouts that have detailed bios for the speakers rather than taking up valuable discussion time. I've thought it best if you read about them and then heard them speak and impart their amazing knowledge to us. There's also a comprehensive list of links and resources. So for those of you who really want to become well-versed in this rather complex and challenging field, you can become an expert in as much time as it takes you to read everything. The massive looting of archaeological sites in Iraq and Syria has focused attention once again on the illicit antiquities trade. That trade has existed for decades. This comes from source nations like Peru or Mali, China, Egypt, Cambodia, Italy, have objects unlawfully excavated and shipped without provenance or records to what are called market nations. Nor, as Tim's film shows, is the tactic of the destruction of history to erase cultural identity, which has come to the forefront by the use of such tactic by ISIS, a recent phenomena. Threatening, attacking, destroying, and looting heritage represents a strategy to weaken the very foundation of the identity of peoples, their history, and the environment in which they built their lives. Without this heritage, the memory is erased and their future is compromised. At a conference in Abu Dhabi that was sponsored by the French government and the United Arab Emirates, the attendees issued a statement. As a mirror of mankind, a guardian of our collective memory, and a witness to the extraordinary creative spirit of humanity, World Cultural Heritage represents the foundation of our common future. The issues discussed tonight are critical not only for the future of the people of the Middle East, but for the future and collective history of all of us. On March 30th, 2017, a group of 7 at a meeting of the cultural ministers in Italy issued another statement on the importance of culture and its role in fostering stable societies and to ensure diversity and dialogue. They also invoke the essential role of heritage protection in a world where culture is increasingly the target of attack. And its destruction and the results of this destruction, products of illegal profiteering in antiquities by third parties. You're about to view Tim Slade's film, The Destruction of Memory. The documentary will serve as the context for a panel discussion following Tim's film with Tim and a brilliant panel of diplomats and experts. This panel, which was to include the UNESCO director, but is now has a substitute who will do a good job as well. Angelo Feliciti, who's a member of the UN Security Council Sanctions Monitoring Team, Luigi Marini, legal advisor to the Permanent Mission of Italy to the UN, and Tess Davis, executive director of the Antiquities Coalition, will enter into a dialogue with you, the audience, and we hope will focus and illustrate on what needs to be done. What are the tools to chart the course and the obstacles on the way? Of special interest, probably to this audience, or at least some members in this audience, are the obligations of private stakeholders, such as the auction houses and online auctions, dealers in antiquities, and the collecting community to deal with this current situation. So I would now like to introduce the award-winning documentary filmmaker, Tim Slade, who has labored long to bring this very important film to us, and I hope it and the issues raised will provoke a very interesting interactive discussion with all of you following the screening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Barbara. I won't say too much before the film, but I came to the issue as a filmmaker rather than as a lawyer or a cultural heritage expert after reading Robert Bevan's book, which really sort of opened my eyes to this issue, which is, not going away and has been an issue since humankind started living together. But what Robert's book did and what the film does is sort of chart a course through the past 100 years, looking at the way the issue developed in a sort of modern context and how legislation and policy sort of followed in its footsteps in effective and less not effective ways. So, the law is really at the heart of the film, and I hope you enjoy watching it, and we'll look forward to discussing it afterwards with you. Thanks.
It's an extraordinarily comprehensive film, taking us really through very complex subjects, international treaties, international law, from the 40s until 2015, 16, and guess what? We're going to start at 2017. So in a certain sense, the panel really will be completing the chronology until today and then look at how we can move forward. So first, thanks a lot again. So I'd like to ask all the panelists to sit down. And I guess I'm not Tim Slade, but that's okay. I wouldn't mind making a film like that. I think we're going to change the order just slightly. And if it's okay, I'd like to start with change the order with Angelo. Where is Angelo? Are you there? With Angelo, and I'm only changing that order because one of the themes that runs through the film is the one of principles. Should this be treated as a war crime? And what can we do about these things? I think that one of the messages of the film is that there's certainly an evolving consciousness towards what Lemkin was arguing for. But one of the questions has to do with the commitment of actually preventing destruction and looting and the various ways in which that can be done. And I think one of the things that we saw in the film is the increasing involvement of the United Nations, and in particular, the Security Council, in getting involved in the destruction of cultural heritage. And in March, on March 24th, 2017, the Security Council unanimously passed a resolution that was introduced by France and Italy. And I should say, if I can, that probably one of the major actors in that effort is Luigi Marini, who is here, who is the legal advisor from Italy. That resolution is part of the packet of materials that you have, and in many respects sets forth comprehensively an agenda for action, not only for nation states, but for international organizations and non-governmental organizations as to how they can cooperate. And Luigi is going to speak about that resolution on this panel in somewhat greater detail. But the reason that I wanted to go to, well, and that historic resolution was historic in part because Elena Bakova, who we heard in the film speak quite eloquently and does speak quite eloquently on behalf of UNESCO, whereas in the film there's some suggestion as to, oh, how can you equate the destruction of monuments with the killing of people and with war crimes. At this historic occasion, Elena Bakova, for the first time, the Secretary General of UNESCO actually addressed the United Nations Security Council. And that resolution that was passed reflected the leadership role that UNESCO has taken and the evolution in the thinking about the destruction of memory, cultural heritage, and it's linked to terrorism and other activities, which then brings us to Angelo Filisetti. You will read in his bio, his history, but importantly, and now he is part of a team that works essentially for the United Nations Security Council. He's part of the United Nations Security Council monitoring team. And I understand the team, but not Angelo, has been working for the Security Council dealing with the trade in illicit antiquities since 2014. But I wanted to ask Angelo to give us his presentation and first address the question of how come the Security Council has a team working for it and under what authority, and then you can jump into your presentation.
Thank you, Barbara. My name is Angelo Felicetti, and I am the last expert of the monitoring team. I joined the monitoring team in the 1st of October of 2016, as in particular for the financing of terrorism connected with the customs operations. Because I have a background as a custom officer for 28 years, and also in the last 8 years, I was the head of the National Risk Analysis Office in Italian Customs Agency. The monitoring team, pursuant the Resolution 1526 of 2004, consists of 10 international experts supported by staff members of the United Nations. It is based here in New York, but its mandate is global in nature. The monitoring team advises 2 sanctions committees of the Security Council. The first one is the 1988 Sanctions Committee, which focuses on the insurgency on Afghanistan. And the second is the 1267, also known as ISIL, Daesh, and Al-Qaeda Sanctions Committee. This committee is the only sanctions committee of the United Nations Security Council that targets global terrorism via targeted sanctions. The mandates of the 2 sanctions committees have been passed under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which means that the implementation of the sanctions and the approved recommendation are binding for member states. The Chapter 7 concern action with respect to threats to the peace, breach of the peace, and acts of aggressions. In this regard, the Security Council shall make a recommendation or decide what measures shall be taken in accordance with Articles 41 and 42 to maintain or restore international peace and security. The sanctions regimes of the 1267 sanctions regime are 3, and are 3 sanctions against listed individuals or entities, and are asset freeze, travel ban, and arms embargo. We have also an additional measures, that is the global ban for cultural goods illegally removed from Iraq since 6 August 1990, and from Syria since 15 March 2011, with or without links to terrorism or its financing. This is the para 17 of Resolution 2199. The 1267 sanctions regimes don't apply to one member state as the other sanction regime of the Security Council, but to transnational non-state actors who constitute a global, regional, and local threat, or an evolving and asymmetric threat using unconventional methods and weapons. The mandate of the monitoring team covers the global assessment of the threat posed by ISIL, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and affiliates worldwide, the monitoring of the implementation of the 3 sanctions, asset freeze, travel ban, arms embargo, and the provision of recommendation to the committee in order to improve the efficiency of the sanctions. Last, the management of the sanction list of the individual entities listed as related to ISIL, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and affiliates. The team's work and threat assessment are based on member states provided information, in particular relevant intelligence, military, and security authorities of the member states. The global asset freeze, apply to any kind of economic resource which potentially may be used to obtain funds, goods, or services. So basically, asset freeze apply to every type of good, as explained in detail in the explanation of terms approved by the Al-Qaeda Sanction Committee on 24 February 2015. In particular, the explanation of terms consider as assets, works of art and cultural property. This is very important because this means that we can apply the measure to all the goods, all the cultural heritage, artifacts, and so on. Substantially, customs and law enforcement must give attention not only to shipment of goods and capital that may result in the availability of the listed subject. This is the first part of the sanctions, but also to those in the availability of other parties that could enter in any way in the future in the availability of a listed subject. Substantially, customs may start the asset freezing procedure if the goods, as the cultural goods, artifacts, and so on, are already in the direct or indirect availability of the entity listed entity. Otherwise, customs must had to stop the operation and start the procedure for the imposition of national penalties and or listing for violating the United Nations on the entity responsible for the operation. This is a good legal framework that can be used by the member states to stop the financing of terrorism, in particular in the field of the artifacts.
Thank you. I have one question, Angela. Does your work also involve, I mean, a lot of people from the antiquities, ancient antiquities dealers and ancient antiquities have taken the position that there really isn't an issue with respect to either the current illicit taking of antiquities from Syria or an issue with respect to the link between terrorism and the illicit antiquities trade. That's to say that there is not a proven nexus between those two items. And could you deal with that from the perspective of the investigations that you've done for the Security Council and discuss whether or not the opposition has any merit from your perspective?
Perhaps I don't understand correctly your question. if the moratorium is totally from Iraq
What?
and Syria.
I can't hear the answer. So I'm just,
Now, the measure of the moratorium for the cultural goods removal from Iraq and Syria is general, not connected with the terrorism financing.
mm-hmm.
I don't understand what is your doubt.
I guess the question that I know that the moratorium is not linked to that, but in terms of the work that you're doing, you're tracing links, you're looking at goods and whether or not those goods are being used to finance terrorism, and those goods include antiquities.
Yes, yes.
And so I guess what I'm asking is, have you found evidence that there are goods being used to finance terrorism?
Yes, yes.
And in which ways?
The monitoring team don't have a mandate of investigation, a difference of the other panel of the other sanction measures. We based all the threat assessment on the information provided by the member states. And the information provided by the member states highlighted that there are a lot of evidence of the use of the cultural goods as financing of terrorism and ISIL. In particular, ISIL use tax the looting and the trade of cultural goods, and don't enter directly in the trade of the cultural goods. This means that there are not evidence of intervention directly of the listed individual or the listed entities of ISIL and Al-Qaeda, but ISIL and Al-Nusra Front in particular gain revenue and financing through the control of territory where the looting are concentrated. In particular, there are documents and certificate authorization for the looting and for the trading of the artifacts and cultural goods looted or stolen in the museum and in the area of conflict. There is also a case that is recorded in the United States. Some items has a gold ring, 2 gold coins, and carved stones that was seized to a terrorist during a battle in terrorist named Abu Sayyaf, a senior leader within ISIL, near Deir Zor in Syria in May 2015. And the lawsuit was filed by the U.S. Attorney Office of the District of Columbia, following an investigation into items seized in a raid, military raid. And this is the first time that a direct connection with at least a terrorist is filed in the US. This is a practical case, and but we have information on several other investigations that are ongoing in several member states, in the Europe and also in the North Africa and the Middle East. Then we think that these measures are to be remain in place because are a tool for a global counterterrorism measures.
We'll come back, and I'm sure the audience also has some questions, further questions, and you have your recommendation, section 2. Would you like to go to that, or should we go to Luigi? We've been talking about the Security Council resolution that's so important and really not only includes the monitoring force, but
it's not important. Yes, please.
if you could talk to us about that resolution, which really sets out in a certain sense, if one could say, or if you would agree, a blueprint for going forward with respect to both law enforcement and transparency, cooperation.
Yep. Thank you, Barbara. At first, let me say I'm really honored to be here to address the New York Bar Association on a question that has occupied my time not only as legal expert at the Italian mission in New York, but also in my prior position as a judge at the High Court in Rome. And so it's really a great honor for me to be here. And secondly, I would like to thank very much the director of the film you have seen. It's a terrific film with an important message, and it's make me easier for me to deal today because it's dealing with the prevention and cultural destruction. So I can focus on the other, mainly on the other part. And so UNESCO is more working on that. I think I can have a different focus. Well, you know, let me explain. Italy has a very long experience in the fight against the looting and trafficking of cultural heritage and property. We have a custodian of an immense cultural heritage.
Sorry, I don't know Windows. What's the full screen button?
No.
Sorry, I use Macs. I'm not sure how to actually
Sure.
get the screen.
We are old-fashioned and
Luigi, maybe you can talk from here.
yeah.
Okay.
Because it's better into the microphone.
Okay, it's okay for me.
Okay.
So Italy has, unfortunately, I can say, has a great experience in fighting against trafficking and looting. We are custodian of an immense cultural heritage, and our fight to have illegally exported items brought back to Italy is well known. But what's probably is perhaps less known is the role that organized crime plays in bringing cultural objects from illegal excavation or looting to the legal market. And this experience is something where we are allows us to have a leading role in the current international effort to curb the destruction and trafficking cultural heritage in situation also of armed conflicts. Most recently, the Italian mission in New York has coordinated a 2-year project together with Jordan mission, UNESCO, Interpol, and UNODC. And this project was ended with this booklet that I have some copies here, but you can collect and find on the Interpol web page on the internet. And most recently, we worked with France to present Resolution 2347 that I contributed to draft and negotiated. So maybe during discussion, some more detailed point could be discussed. Well, we have seen what our director explained in his wonderful film about the 40s, the 70s, but we cannot forget that cultural heritage and properties have been destroyed, looted, and trafficked throughout all human history. We may remember Babylon or Jerusalem or Rome or Alexandria in Egypt. So what's happened today is something that always happened in the past. And so Balkans, Afghanistan, Libya, Mali, Iraq are just, as Cambodia a few decades ago, are just an example of what happens all along our history. But what is important there is, I want to come to the second aspect of the problem, that armed groups and warlords as also tend to see looting and trafficking as a potential source of income and a method for financing themselves and for financing war and conflicts. And so for ISIL, Daesh, the two dimensions of destroying and trafficking are not incompatible. They are just two aspects of the same activity. And so staggering destruction like as in Palmyra and the systematic excavation and or large-scale trafficking in antiquities contribute to the same general goal, and the result is spoliation and irreparable damages. And this brings to another aspect I want to underline today. The international trade in antiquities and artifacts involves both legal and illegal actors. So it couldn't be spoliation, looting, excavation in Syria or elsewhere if there were not a market where these things could be destinated and people that are buying them and keeping them all over the world. So what happens that since centuries, valuable items are identified and selected by specialists. It's not for case that there are some special items are trafficked and others not. The most valuable are usually trafficked because they bring a lot of money. And these experts and specialized people facilitated border control, crossing borders through forged documents, hidden compartments, and sometimes paying off corrupt officials. So this path from excavation, looting to destination, it's a very complex and is managed by expert people who know perfectly how to move, where to move, how to pay, and how to take advantage of trafficking. So we must be clear on this point. Free ports, confidential communications, and secure financial transactions are part of the problem and a part of this path. There is something, there is one point really I want to underline. It would be false to equate stronger law and regulations with restraint of free trade. I am fully convinced that the vast gray zones in the antiquities market are detrimental also to fair and high-quality transaction. In other words, I think that transparency can be and must be a shared value among us. I don't see that lawmakers, law enforcement, and traders must be one fighting against the other. We can be on the same side of the table and work together for a fair and transparent market. So I don't want to bore you with the complex environment that we have to face from a legal point of view. We have humanitarian law, the UNESCO UNIDROIT Convention, General Assembly resolution, Security Council resolution, and we have 4 main areas of legal zones and instruments, and this is just a partial list of all UN General Assembly main resolutions dedicated to protecting cultural heritage, and these are all resolutions dedicated to this item by UN Security Council. I don't want to bore you with numbers, but what I want to say is, if we had all these legal instruments, why a new UN Security Council resolution was considered necessary by Italy and France and presented in early 2017. The point is that all previous legal instruments were focused on specific needs, on specific targets, but the international legal framework was weakened by gaps and it still suffers from a deficit of coherence and harmonization. Second, the existing resolution did not include sufficient prevention and preventive measures, and the measures already foreseen did not include, were not detailed enough. So they were very general, broad, but not sufficiently clear and detailed. Third point, criminal action connected with international trafficking were tackled and regulated only in general terms, while operational obligations and tools were, for the most part, ignored. So the sense of Italy and France, while presenting the new resolution, was to put all aspects together, to have prevention on one side and fighting illegal trade and organized crime working on illegal trade, to put together these 2 aspects, to have a broader and coherent approach and more useful for all people called to have, to implement this kind of resolution. I think this approach was possible in New York because we could take advantage of the growing awareness of the international community at legal, cultural, and political levels. Just thinking about the declaration we had in Milan, in Cairo, Amman, Abu Dhabi, or all the process we had in New York, thanks to Italy and Jordan project, dealing with this issue, or let's think about all recommendations provided by the monitoring team or provided by UNODC or other legal bodies. All these advancements made possible to have a new resolution that we tried to present in order to complement what was already existing and to make an advancement. Now it should be, we could come to a more detailed exposition of the resolution if you want, but maybe it's better to do in the second turn of our presentation, just not to take too much time. Or if you want,
As you like. I think we can actually proceed to slightly more detail.
Yep.
Because it's so interesting. And then when we talk about the exact steps in terms of prevention, we will then relate to the other panelists, and then you can jump in again.
Okay, thank you very much.
Continue.
I may continue?
Yes?
Okay, so I prepared just 2 simple slides trying to summarize the resolution in its main points. So the intent of the resolution was to take an approach comprehensive to threat cultural heritage and property. A resolution emphasizes how much state in their sovereignty have the primary responsibility to protect their cultural heritage on the one hand, but at the same time, they are entitled to request restitutions of illegally exported items when appropriate. Another important aspect for us was to call upon member states to adopt preventive measures And one of the most important innovation of the resolution was a clear inclusion of having safe and protected sites to recover items at risk. It's the first time that this measure is highlighted in one resolution. It has been a quite controversial negotiation on this point. The expression, the resolution used safe havens, and it's a quite complicated term to be used in this kind of resolution, but the meaning of having safe havens for item at risk is to have places where they can be collected and recovered in situation of risk. Another important point is to highlight the importance of having international funds aimed at making protective measures operational. The point is preventive measures, working on sites, working with experts and to prevent action requests funding and requests action. So the Security Council is calling upon states to adopt measures also for funding all this initiative. Another point is a strong call for the adoption of legal and operational measures to prevent and counter financing of terrorism. This was already foreseen by Resolution 2199, but in very general terms. So this resolution is an attempt to go more in detail, to be more operational, and to help states to adopt more concrete and effective measures. And so, for the first time, some measures refer to the documentation of provenance. It was not easy issue to negotiate. I think that the language adopted by resolution in OP, in paragraph 8 and 17, it's a very balanced language. It has been discussed word by word. We fully understand how complex it is for legal markets to deal with items legally transferred but without any or without sufficient documentation. We are fully aware of the point, but we are also fully aware of the point that without documentation of provenance and without declaration from issued by interest states, illegal trade and trafficking can be easier and is today easier. So this is a very important point of the resolution, and we are fully confident that the implementation of the resolution will find the better way of balancing the two interests. Other important measures concern the establishment of specialized bodies at the judicial, law enforcement, and customs services, and a strong call for international cooperation that must be strengthened and made operational, also in the framework of the United Nations Convention on Organized Crime. This is an attempt to have balance. We have a general convention on trafficking, on combating transnational organized crime, and the resolution, 2014 resolution of General Assembly on guidelines to fight against organized crime. They are complementing each other. But this aspect was never included by Security Council in a coherent way, referring to this specific issue of cultural property protection. So resolution tried to put together different sources and establishing a good language. I think it's a good language you may find in paragraph 12 of the resolution. The resolution also calls upon states on one side and the UN international bodies and agencies to work in close cooperation. I think the experience we have done in New York is very important. For almost 2 years, countries, Italy and Jordan, and UN agencies, UNODC and UNESCO and Interpol have worked together, studying, preparing documentation, meeting, presenting proposals. And so this methodology of working together from different perspectives on lawmakers and implementing bodies is fundamental also for the future. And this good experience has been included in the resolution 2347. The importance of early information sharing, and joint initiative and training is clearly underlined in paragraph 17.d. And I'm coming to the end. The last point I want to underline is the critical role of public-private cooperation and all educational programs. Trying to wrap up, let me just say that we have plenty of good legal instruments now. I think this resolution is complementing the other and try to fill all the main gaps. What we need now is implementation. I think we don't need much more legal instrument or new legal instrument or complicating sometimes, because too many instruments sometimes are confusing and difficult to manage it to come to a shared interpretation. Now we have to work to have a good implementation, and so I think that this is our duty, our goal today.
Thank you. That's really informative, and we're going to come back to Luigi and for more comments, but also to the audience to ask him questions. Now I'm going to turn to the other side, and we talk about prevention and UNESCO. We have the ladies who are going to tell us how to implement and get everything done. So my question for Lily, who's kindly decided or accepted to step in for Marie-Paul Rudil, who at the last minute was unavailable to us, and is here representing UNESCO. I have a question that will let you tell us what you're going to do, and that is, at this recent meeting of the G7, to which I had referred earlier, a delegate stated, problems of heritage destruction, illegal excavation, illicit traffic, as in the case of Syria and Iraq, have now become a scourge, and the international community will have to deal with it. We saw one element of that was the resolution, and in fact, the statement was made March 30th, 2017, just after the passage of this historic resolution. In addition, in 2015, in the context of the resolution that Irina Bokova spoke of in the film, she has stated that the persecution of people based on their ethnicity and the deprivation of their intangible and physical cultural heritage is cultural cleansing, part of the tragedy of the Middle East. As the specialized agency for culture, how is UNESCO adopting its response to these unprecedented challenges, both in conjunction with its work with the Security Council and in terms of implementation of the preservation side of the issues?
Thank you, Barbara. And indeed, allow me to express the regrets of Ms. Rudil that couldn't join you all tonight, but she wanted to assure you that certainly UNESCO has to be represented at this important meeting on this very special issue. So thank you very much to you and your team. I could not but start by commending and indeed joining the previous speakers' team about the excellent and marvelous work that he indeed have done in pulling together this film, in definitely narrating the story and depicting the complexity of the issue of the protection of cultural heritage. And this is the first time I watched the film, and if you allow me just a few brief comments from my personal perspective before I start elaborating and responding to your question. UNESCO, from UNESCO side, we have always regarded culture as a part of our identity, and I believe this message has been very strongly depicted in the film that we all saw, that indeed culture makes us who we are. Culture actually makes us human. As we've heard from one of the persons that were interviewed, distinguishes us from the other living animal species. And indeed, this is the approach that UNESCO has had. Me personally, coming from the Balkans, I was deeply touched by of course, the whole movie, but certainly deeply touched about the story of my neighbors. And certainly I remember the shock in the 90s when we heard about the massacres of people and the destruction of the Mostar Bridge. For us, we've never distinguished that the bridge or the Sarajevo library belonged to the Muslim community, to the Catholic, or to the Orthodox community. For us, it has always been the symbol of the Bosnia and Herzegovina people. So it's very hard to, on one side, to see how culture could be used to divide people, instigate hatred against other people, but also with the restoration of the bridge, what UNESCO did in 2005 with the restoration of the bridge, indeed we also saw how culture could build hope and serve as a reconstruction, as a power of dialogue, and as a power of reminding people that these sites have been there, and they are actually evidence and witness that people with different cultural, ethnic background have lived peacefully and in harmony together. This is also what we have in Syria and Iraq. All these monuments that ISIL now is targeting on the basis of the narrative they want to indeed advance, the narrative that there has never be anything important before or after the exact way they are propagating Islam. So the same thing is indeed we saw in the Balkans. So thank you very much, Tim, for these messages. They are very much along the lines that UNESCO perceives culture, and very much we also saw that the progression and the evolution of the understanding and interpretation of the international law, and my colleague Luigi very much touched upon about the recent developments, and I would like to add that indeed in the UNESCO's perspective, the latest decision of the International Criminal Court, as well as the latest Security Council resolutions 2199 and 2347, they testify to the importance of incorporating cultural heritage into the security perspective, but also they testified to the importance of connecting areas that previously haven't been connected. Which we saw in the movie, which we saw in the film, was that we distinguish, historically there hasn't been a recognition of the deep linkages between culture and human rights, between culture and security. Now we cannot regard culture separately, and I believe this is a very significant milestone with the resolution that was adopted in March, and also previously with the decision of the International Criminal Court. So this is indeed how UNESCO, but thank you, Barbara, for the question, but this is indeed how UNESCO regards the issue of protection of cultural heritage. We consider it in complexity, and we believe that the issues of protection of cultural heritage, cultural diversity and human rights, security issue, cultural issues, humanitarian issues, they are very much linked together, and also the response could come from all the different relevant actors from these from these fields. And as our Director General was quoted on numerous times, she has spoken very passionately about what we are recently witnessing with the intentional destruction of cultural heritage in the Middle East. She has called this phenomenon cultural cleansing. And last March, at the adoption of the Resolution 2347, she clearly stated that the protection of cultural heritage is not just a cultural or even development issue, but a security imperative. So UNESCO, as Barbara mentioned, is as probably everyone knows, is the United Nations Specialized Agency for Culture, and for more than 7 decades, it has developed a solid international law on the protection of culture from a comprehensive point of view, starting with the 1940 Fifth Convention that we heard about, the Convention on the Protection of Cultural Heritage in time of armed conflicts, but also going through the World Heritage Convention, through the Convention prohibiting illicit trafficking of cultural property, tackling issues about intangible cultural heritage, which is also very intrinsic to the culture, and going through the protection of underwater cultural heritage. And the most recent one, if I just can briefly mention, the UNESCO Convention on the cultural the diversities, on the expression of cultural diversity. So all these comprehensive treaty body networks, UNESCO is taking it forward and adapting to the latest challenges which we now see in an unprecedented scale is happening in the Middle East. Because as you also saw in the film, the intentional destruction of cultural heritage has been there. We've seen it in Afghanistan, we've seen it in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we've seen it even during the mostly as collateral damage during the Second World War. But what we are seeing now indeed is on a very big scale and a very unprecedented level. And indeed, we are looking at that phenomenon and approaching from all these different perspectives of the international law that UNESCO is custodian of, but also working with member states to support them in preventing, mitigating, and recovering the loss of cultural heritage and diversity as a result of conflict, as well as working to incorporate the protection of cultural heritage into humanitarian action, security strategies, and also peace-building processes. Indeed, this approach is part of the newly adopted strategy that UNESCO recently adopted in 2015, and under which we are implementing actions together with member states, mainly along the following 3 pillars. We are doing advocacy and awareness-raising activities. We are doing documentation and monitoring. And we are also supporting member states with capacity building and technical assistance. So along these lines, we have a very targeted and specific approach in Libya, Syria, Iraq, Mali, Afghanistan, with specific angles. And another moment that I wanted to kind of highlight during today's meeting is the launch of a global social campaign that UNESCO invites international partners, indeed the Unite for Heritage campaign. We are trying to make it as global as possible and to include and mobilize young people to step in and to give their voices, not only young people, but other stakeholders, but to give their voice why cultural heritage is important, why the preservation of cultural heritage is important.
No,
So
I think
more or
we have
less
to let
this is,
Chess-
no, thank you very much for the
So,
attention. And,
Tess Davis is the executive director of the Antiquities Coalition. We heard Deborah Lair in the film. And I think it's an awesome, powerful group because on the day of their press conference, in which they issued, last year, they issued recommendations to the U.S. government on what should be done in this area of conflict antiquities. And one of the recommendations was that the United States should pass legislation which had been held to implement the Security Council resolution. And it had been held up for, I think, 18 months in the Senate. And following the press conference, suddenly our dysfunctional Senate unanimously passed this bill. So this is the awesome Tess Davis. And she's going to focus on what at least one nation state is doing and then tell us what another did under her guidance, which was Cambodia.
Well, thank you. And first of all, thank you, Barbara, and the New York City Bar for the opportunity to speak here tonight on behalf of the Antiquities Coalition. And it's certainly it's an honor to be on a panel with so many distinguished people in the field, truly, everyone here. As we're seeing in the headlines, as we saw in the film this evening, under Daesh's black flag, culture is a weapon of war and terrorist financing tool. But as we also saw in the destruction of memory, this threat goes far beyond the present day. It goes far beyond Daesh. It goes far beyond Iraq and Syria and far beyond the Middle East and North Africa. This is a continuing global crisis, and it requires continuing global action. And for that, for continuing global action, of course, we turn to international law, to international agreements like the Geneva Conventions, the Hague Convention, the UNESCO Convention, the UNIDROIT Convention, the Rome Statute, and others, and also to international practice like the incredibly critical UN Security Council resolution that just passed, thanks to the efforts of some here. Of course, you've heard much tonight about those efforts and also in the film about how international law is responding to the current crisis, about what it requires of states. And of course, for the lawyers in the room, we know that in the past, only sovereign states were subject to international law, but increasingly it has embraced non-state actors such as non-governmental organizations, multinational corporations, and even individuals, and all have an important role to play in shaping international law, which is, of course, always a changing thing, to better combat cultural crimes. As executive director of the Antiquities Coalition, I've been honored to have a front row seat to ongoing efforts on this front, both by the public and the private sector. Our not-for-profit organization unites a diverse group of experts in the fight against cultural racketeering and cultural destruction. We champion better law and policy. We try to foster international dialogue and cooperation, and also to develop and going with the theme of this evening, to implement solutions. I encourage you to go to our website, antiquitiescoalition.org, to learn more. But in the brief time I have this evening, I just wanted to talk about one effort, our Culture Under Threat campaign, under the banner of which we're working to build and channel, more importantly, the political will to combat these cultural crimes. So today, as we all know, the Middle East and North Africa, the MENA region, that is on the front lines of this fight, although I think it's important to continuously stress, as Tim's film so beautifully does, that just a generation ago, it was Europe that was fighting the organized plunder and cultural destruction of art, and we have no idea where the next crisis will be tomorrow. This is not just a problem for that region. And I think it's also incredibly important to stress that the region itself is doing a great deal to fight back at all levels. On the individual level, like individuals like Amr al-Azam, whom you saw in the film, whom we've had the honor to work with closely, whose colleagues in Syria are, without any exaggeration, risking their lives on a daily basis to try to prevent the looting and trafficking and destruction of art there. And when that fails, to document it. We see it in communities like the people of Mali who banded together to save the vast majority of the manuscripts there in Timbuktu before Ansar al-Din came in, or even the population in Mosul, which saved the Grand Mosque, the historic mosque, and the city center against Daesh. And we also are seeing in the governments there, which are increasingly recognizing, again, that this is not just a matter of preservation, but as the UN Security Council has recognized, this is a matter of peace and security. We've been very privileged at the Antiquities Coalition to have the opportunity to support a number of the MENA governments in this fight, and we'll be returning to the region this fall for our third annual Culture Under Threat conference there. And this ministerial summit will again bring together the Arab League with its member governments in a show of force against those who seek to profit from the blood antiquities trade and from cultural destruction. We'll build on previous events, first in Cairo in 2015, hosted by the Arab Republic of Egypt, and then in Jordan of last year, hosted by the government of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And at last year's events, there were actually 17 governments present at the ministerial level, so ministers of antiquities or cultural tourism, depending on the country involved and what that individual was there. And this was actually the first time that these individuals had been in one room together and able to discuss how they can fight this effort as a region, because we all well know that it does not stop at the borders of any one country. At last year's event, these governments launched the Middle East and North African Task Force against cultural racketeering to coordinate their efforts against Daesh, but also against others, again, who were involved in cultural racketeering. And with the adoption of an aggressive action plan, and a document called the Amman Communique, they recommitted themselves to this fight and also reaffirmed that crimes against culture are crimes against civilization itself. And work is now underway by these countries to implement the goals of that communique and the action plan, which focuses on a number of issues that have already been raised, including awareness raising, improving communication, both at the national level, the regional level, and the international level, and also capacity building, like the great work that UNESCO is doing, particularly with law and law enforcement across the world. But the MENA region cannot do this alone. The United States makes up 43% of the global art market, and we thus have an opportunity and indeed a responsibility to act here and make a difference. In recognition of that responsibility, with the Asia Society here in New York and also with the Middle East Institute in Washington, we convened the Culture Under Threat Task Force to examine the current crisis, but more importantly, to make recommendations, particularly targeting the U.S. government, again, given the U.S.'s role in the market. And with this task force, we brought together leaders from the heritage community, the law enforcement community, the military and security communities. It was a very diverse group, which hoped to develop a very comprehensive range of recommendations. In this report, these experts put forward 31 specific recommendations to address the ongoing crisis and hopefully prevent future ones, including new policies, practices, and priorities for the United States to implement, both on its own, but also what it could be pushing for within the international community, and including steps that could be taken by the then Obama administration, by Congress, by the United Nations. All that, the goal was to focus on recommendations that could be achieved with a reasonable amount of funding and political will. And indeed, there are a lot of things out there that can be done. And knowing that time is short, again, I encourage you to look on our website and see what these experts have put together, including was the passage of the bill Barbara mentioned that represented the work of so many individuals over so many years, including New York's own Congressman Ingle, who played a large role in that. And I'm happy to answer any questions. But just in closing, let me say that we are, of course, facing a horrible crisis, but there are a number of things that are being done, and perhaps more importantly, a number of things that can be done and should be done and hopefully will be done in the future.
Thank you. You've all been so patient. I think I would like to at least give one word to the filmmaker, Tim, or I will turn it over to the audience. You decide. Okay, so you've all been sitting here so patiently, and here's a wonderful panel, and everybody has just really tipped the iceberg in terms of their knowledge and what they have to say. So I'd like to ask anybody who may have a question to direct it to the panel. And if nobody has any questions, then I'm sure the panel will have a lot more to say. So, Colette?
Yeah, look, it was really reading Robert's book, and you know, as someone who's coming from outside of, not coming from the heritage community, you know, I know a lot of history, I thought, but I think what it really showed me was this process that goes on that's not really that visible, that wasn't that visible to the general public, and that what I was used to seeing in a silo mentality, you know, that the Buddhas of Bamiyan were destroyed in 2001, and then, you know, sort of 8 years before that was the Bosnian War, and so I think it sort of exploded that way of seeing this as just one-off events that happened independently of each other, but, you know, what Robert's sort of thesis was that it's this ongoing process where things are related to each other, and where if something's not remedied properly, it can lead to something else, and hence on we go. So, yeah, so it was really sort of being quite viscerally shocked that I hadn't really thought about this before, and that no one had presented this to me before for sort of obvious reasons that we look at in the film. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose, you know, my net perspective is that I hope that the issue has a sustained focus in the media and elsewhere, so that we can start to actually come up with real solutions like Luigi and his, you know, colleagues at the United Nations have done in this document, and others, you know, to really sort of tighten the gaps.
Actually, if I could intercede, Colette is working on a project that coincidentally is in the film.
Oh, okay.
And perhaps you could mention exactly the nature of the project, because it is implementation.
Well, thank you. I think one of the exciting things that
Can everybody hear?
is the ability for private partnerships basically takes and we actually worked with Amr Al-Azam, who was in the film, and we returned to that museum that we saw that was being sandbagged, and we applied a traceable trafficking, and basically also proving that there's that can be identified with the customs agent if they
Great. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I was actually just reading about it. It's an incredible extension of, yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, the question is really a wide question because the resolution has different parts and different messages and different goals. So, but coming to a couple of points. The first is prevention. I think that the work done in Abu Dhabi and the work done by TESS and the Antiquities Coalition in sensitive parts of the world, that is putting together lawmakers and governance and having this clear picture on prevention, putting together Western state, Eastern state, Middle East, it's something really important. So now we have the instruments to do. So funding UNESCO, funding Abu Dhabi Fund, and starting with projects could be the best way of implementing prevention all over. Of course, when you have a war going on like in Syria or in Aleppo, there is very few things you can do in that moment. But you can work preventing some situation, putting in safe places, artifact at risk, and you can work with local communities just to prevent new forms of violence or fighting against each other. So I think now we have a clear picture and a political level. Coming to the part I'm closer, that is law enforcement and work on this side, preventing trafficking, I think we can do a lot of things now. We have good instruments. This resolution includes new instruments. So we can work on that. I think one of the most important things is to put together agencies, states, and United Nation bodies all together to work on that. We have to implement the documentation. We have to implement the weight of having inventories. So we can start from the very beginning. We have to identify possible targets. We have to prepare inventories of all sensible and at-risk situation, sites, and objects. We have to work together for identifying the way of transferring them, working very well and using databases already existing. We have different databases, but sometimes they don't speak the one with the other. We have Interpol, we have UNESCO, we have WCO, we have national databases. And this is a very important tool we have. We must work for dialoguing each other. One other simple point. If you don't have central authorities or central bodies working at the national level and local level, and you don't detect, you don't know, and you do work on that, you cannot do anything on the ground effective. But building a national dedicated body is not so costly, it is not so complicated. Maybe small countries may have 2, 3 people working on that, collecting information, putting together local communities, cataloging, and having a national database can be done without so many investments. But it's not been done. Only few countries have established central authorities. Only few countries are working on inventories. Only few countries are implemented international and national databases that have to work together. This can be done. Now the political will is stronger, awareness is higher, instruments have been strengthened. So I think working on this, to answer to you with one word, we need coordination. Someone has to start coordinating effectively all these initiatives to have a clear picture of the initiative ongoing, to detect gaps, and to work for implementing in a coordinated way.
So I think that we've promised the Bar Association that if we don't want to be locked in here, that we have to leave promptly because they will be closing the front door. So I'd just like to thank, first of all, the filmmaker who generated this, Tim, again. Thank you so much. And I want to thank the rest of the panel for their time. And I want to thank all of you. And I just want to say that there are so many other things that we could have talked about, and helmets on the ground, and safe havens, restitution, UNIDROIT. We just don't have time. It's a big subject and a big problem, but I hope this has made you so interested in the subject that we will have yet another program organized by even more committees of the Bar Association. So thanks a lot for coming.